Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with that feeling that something terrible is about to happen, but you can't identify exactly what? That weight in your chest that seems to grow every day, that diffuse anxiety that accompanies us as we scroll endlessly through social media, searching for something we never managed to find? If you feel this, you're not alone. And what I'm going to share with you today might explain why this sensation isn't just your imagination, but a sign of something much bigger that's approaching. We're walking toward what I call the great emotional collapse of 2026, an event that will hit millions of people simultaneously, and most don't even suspect it's happening. But there is a path to navigate through this approaching storm, and that's exactly what we're going to explore together in the next few minutes. To understand what's happening to us today, we need to go back in time and observe how humanity has always dealt with its emotions and connections. For thousands of years, we lived in small communities where each individual personally knew all the other people around them. Our brains evolved to process between 100 to 150 meaningful relationships, a number known as Dunbar's number. In these communities, when someone felt anxious, depressed, or lost, there was always a natural support system. Individual suffering was quickly identified and addressed by the tribe. Emotions were processed collectively through rituals, shared stories, and real physical connections. The concept of being emotionally alone in the midst of crowds didn't exist. The first major break in this system happened with the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, millions of people were torn from their rural communities and thrown into chaotic urban centers. But even then, there were still relatively stable social structures. The extended family, the church, the neighborhood, work colleagues you saw every day at the same factory. There were emotional anchors, reference points for our mental sanity. The pace of change was slow enough for our minds to gradually adapt. Now we've arrived at the 21st century, and something completely different is happening. We are no longer just dealing with physical or social changes. We're facing a revolution in the very nature of human experience. Our minds, which evolved to live in African savannas with small and stable groups, are being bombarded with more information in a single hour than our ancestors processed in an entire month. Every day, we're exposed to the edited and filtered lives of thousands of strangers, creating an impossible pattern of comparison with our own imperfect reality. But the real catalyst for the approaching collapse isn't just information overload. It's something much more subtle and devastating: the systematic erosion of our capacity to form authentic emotional connections. Social media algorithms weren't designed to genuinely connect us with other people. They were designed to capture our attention and keep it for as long as possible. And they discovered that the best way to do this is to feed us content that provokes intense but superficial emotions: anger, envy, fear, indignation. These emotions are addictive, but they're not nutritious for our souls. At the same time, we're witnessing the emergence of an entire generation that grew up in this digital environment. For many young people today, the difference between online interaction and real human connection is becoming increasingly blurred. They might have thousands of followers, receive hundreds of likes, participate in constant conversations, and still feel a deep and inexplicable emptiness. It's as if they're being fed only emotional sugar, intense peaks of gratification followed by devastating crashes. I need to stop for a moment and ask you directly, when was the last time you had a truly deep conversation with someone? I'm not talking about discussing news or complaining about work, but a conversation where you felt genuinely seen and understood by another person. I know it might be hard to remember, and this isn't your fault. We live in a world that is systematically destroying our capacity for emotional intimacy. If you feel that your conversations have become superficial, that your friendships have lost depth, share in the comments. I miss deep connections when your honesty can help others realize they're not alone in this experience of isolation amid hyperconnectivity. Now, let's look more closely at what's happening in 2024 and 2025, the years that will precede the collapse. We're seeing alarming signs in all mental health metrics. Anxiety and depression rates among young people have reached historic levels. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. What really worries me are the more subtle patterns that are emerging. People report a growing sense of unreality as if they were living in a movie or dream. Others describe an inability to feel deep emotions as if they were emotionally anesthetized. There are growing reports of people who feel they've lost their core identity, who can no longer distinguish between their own thoughts and constant external influences. These symptoms aren't a coincidence. They're the direct result of living in an environment our minds weren't designed to process. Imagine trying to run modern software on a 30-year-old computer. The system might work for a while, but eventually it will start showing failures, crashes, erratic behaviors. That's exactly what's happening to our minds. We're running the 21st century experience on Paleolithic mental hardware. Artificial intelligence is about to accelerate this process exponentially. In 2025 and 2026, we'll see the massive implementation of AI assistants that are capable of maintaining deeply convincing and emotionally satisfying conversations. Millions of people will discover that it's easier, more predictable, and less risky to form emotional bonds with artificial entities than with other human beings. Human relationships are complicated, unpredictable, sometimes painful. AIs can be programmed to always be understanding, always available, always say exactly what we want to hear. But here's the problem. Connections with AIs, however sophisticated they may be, cannot satisfy our deep evolutionary needs for authentic human connection. It's like trying to quench thirst by drinking salt water. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. People who become dependent on artificial relationships will experience a type of existential loneliness that's almost impossible to describe. They'll be surrounded by connections, but fundamentally isolated from their own species. And then we arrive at 2026, the year I chose not by chance, but because it will be when these trends converge at a critical point. It will be the year when an entire generation that grew up primarily in the digital environment reaches full adulthood, facing real-world pressures without having developed adequate emotional tools. It will also be the year when the first generations of truly persuasive AIs will be widely available. And perhaps most importantly, it will be a crucial election year in many countries, amplifying social tensions that are already at the boiling point. The collapse won't happen as a single dramatic event. It will be more like an emotional avalanche that will spread through social networks and digital communities. It will start with some individuals experiencing deep existential crises, loss of sense of purpose, inability to form meaningful relationships. But because we all live digitally interconnected, these crises will spread rapidly. We'll see waves of collective anxiety, episodes of mass depersonalization, chaotic social movements led by people who have lost touch with shared reality. What makes this particularly dangerous is that most of the affected people won't recognize what's happening to them. They'll attribute their feelings to external causes. The economy, politics, climate change, anything except the true root of the problem, which is the deterioration of our basic emotional infrastructure. As a result, the solutions they'll seek will be inadequate. More medication, more individual therapy, more isolation, more digital consumption. It's like trying to cure an infection with more sugar. But here's what most don't realize. This collapse isn't inevitable. It's not a natural consequence of technological progress. It's the result of specific choices our society has made about how to integrate technology into our lives. And because they are choices, they can be changed. But this requires that we first recognize what's really happening. The truth is that we're facing the largest psychological experiment in human history, and we are the test subjects. Technology companies, driven only by profit, have fundamentally redesigned how we experience reality, how we form relationships, how we process emotions, how we find meaning. And they did this without any consideration for the long-term consequences for our mental and social well-being. So how do we navigate through this approaching storm? How do we protect ourselves and those we love from the emotional collapse that's coming? The answer isn't in completely rejecting technology, which would be impossible and counterproductive. The answer lies in recovering our conscious agency over how we interact with it. First, we need to understand that our attention is the most valuable resource we possess, and currently we're donating it freely to systems that don't have our best interests in mind. Every time we pick up our phone to just quickly check social media, we're allowing algorithms to reprogram our neural circuits. This isn't a metaphor. It's literally what's happening in our brain. The first defense is to establish regular periods of complete digital disconnection. I'm not talking about an hour before bed or during meals. I'm talking about entire days, regularly, where you don't have access to any connected technology. During these periods, observe what happens to your mind. At first, you'll probably experience something similar to withdrawal syndrome, restlessness, anxiety, compulsion to check devices that aren't there. This isn't a sign of weakness. It's evidence that your mind has been hijacked and you're beginning the liberation process. Second, we need to relearn the art of deep conversation and genuine presence. When you're with other people, establish a simple rule. All devices stay in another room, not just silenced, or turned face down, literally somewhere else, you'll be surprised by the difference this makes in the quality of your interactions. Without the possibility of digital distraction, your mind will gradually remember how to truly connect with another person. Third, and perhaps most important, we need to intentionally cultivate our capacity to be alone with our own thoughts without needing constant external stimulus. Solitude isn't loneliness. It's the fundamental ability to be interesting company for yourself. Start with just 15 minutes a day, sitting in silence, without music, podcasts, books, or any external input. Just you and your mind. At first, this might feel unbearable. Your mind might feel like a hyperactive monkey jumping from branch to branch. But over time, you'll begin to experience something our society has almost made us forget: genuine inner peace. We also need to recognize that authentic human relationships require vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage. In a world where every interaction can be documented, shared, and publicly judged, we've developed a natural tendency to present ourselves only in ways we know are socially safe. But real connection happens when we lower these defenses and allow other people to see who we really are, including our flaws, fears, and uncertainties. One of the most powerful practices you can adopt is what I call conscious vulnerability conversations. Once a week, have a conversation with someone close where you share something that really worries you, something you're struggling with, something that makes you feel insecure, not to seek advice or solutions, but simply to be seen and understood in your complete humanity. As we approach 2026, we also need to be especially vigilant about our relationship with artificial intelligence. The AIs being developed are extraordinarily sophisticated at simulating empathy and understanding. They will be tempting, especially when we're feeling alone or misunderstood. I'm not suggesting we completely avoid this technology, but that we maintain clear awareness about what it can and cannot offer us. An AI can process information. It can even generate responses that sound empathetic and understanding, but it cannot really know us because it cannot share the fundamental experience of being human, the consciousness of mortality, the experience of bodily emotions, the complexity of navigating relationships with other equally complicated and imperfect beings. When we turn to AIs to satisfy our deepest emotional needs, we're essentially choosing a skillful imitation of emotional nutrition instead of the real thing. What we need to understand is that the emotional collapse of 2026 won't just be an individual crisis faced by millions of people separately. It will be a collective crisis that requires collective solutions. Entire communities will need to relearn how to emotionally care for one another. Schools will need to teach not just technological skills, but basic emotional skills like empathy, presence, and authentic communication. Workplaces will need to recognize that employees are human beings with complex emotional needs, not just resources to maximize productivity. Perhaps most importantly, we need to start measuring success and progress in completely different ways. Currently, our society measures practically everything in terms of efficiency, productivity, economic growth, and quantitative indicators. But what if we started measuring how often people feel genuinely connected to one another? What if we tracked levels of inner peace, sense of purpose, capacity to experience simple joy? What if we considered the quality of our relationships as an indicator of social health, as important as GDP? This shift in perspective requires that we question some of the most fundamental premises of our modern culture. We've been conditioned to believe that more choices are always better, that more connections are always better, that more information is always better, that more stimulation is always better. But what if we discover these premises are false? What if we find out that less but deeper is the path to a more fulfilling life? Consider this possibility. What if instead of trying to know thousands of people superficially through social networks, we focused on knowing deeply just a few dozen people? What if instead of consuming hundreds of pieces of information per day, we intentionally chose some high-quality sources and absorbed them completely? What if instead of seeking constant novelty and stimulation, we learned to find infinite richness in the silent contemplation of our own experience? These aren't romantically nostalgic ideas about going back to the past. They're practical survival strategies for navigating a future that will be fundamentally different from anything humanity has ever experienced. We're creating a world where technology can satisfy many of our practical needs with growing efficiency, but where our deepest emotional needs are being systematically neglected. The emotional collapse of 2026 can be seen as a crisis, but it can also be seen as an opportunity for our species to awaken to the fact that technological progress without corresponding emotional progress inevitably leads to suffering. An opportunity to redesign our social institutions based on a deeper understanding of human nature, an opportunity to create a society that optimizes for human flourishing instead of just economic growth. But this opportunity will only be seized if enough people recognize what's happening before it's too late. And this is where you come in. Every person who awakens to this dynamic and begins taking conscious steps to protect their own emotional health isn't just saving themselves. They're creating waves of positive influence that will spread through the relationship networks. When you choose to have deeper conversations, when you model genuine presence, when you demonstrate that it's possible to live more intentionally amid digital chaos, you're offering other people an alternative they may not know they were looking for. You're becoming a beacon of sanity in a world that's rapidly losing its emotional compass. As we approach the critical moments that lie ahead, remember that the most important preparation isn't stockpiling supplies or learning physical survival skills. It's strengthening your emotional resilience, deepening your authentic relationships, and developing the capacity to find peace and purpose regardless of chaotic external circumstances. The future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create through our daily choices. And at this critical moment in human history, every choice we make about how to interact with technology, how to relate to one another, how to spend our attention, is literally shaping the kind of world we live in. If these reflections touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. by connecting with a community of people who share your concern about the direction we are taking as a society, you'll find not only understanding, but also practical strategies for navigating these challenging times with more wisdom and less suffering. Join us in this essential conversation. Subscribe so we can continue exploring together how to live with more authenticity and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and isolated. This isn't just an academic discussion about future trends. It's an urgent dialogue about how to preserve our humanity in an era of unprecedented change.
The key issue is that democracy is based on trust, whereas dictatorship is based on terror. If you systematically destroy trust in institutions, destroy trust in the media, in academia, in the courts, and so forth, some people think that this is liberating the people from these institutions.
Right.
It's not. When you destroy all trust, the only thing that can still work is a dictatorship. Right. So this is what would-be dictators do. They systematically destroy trust. And the other thing to realize is that the vast majority of information is not truth. A key misconception, especially in places like Silicon Valley, is to equate information with truth. Most information is junk. Because, to write a truthful story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money in research and fact-checking, whereas fiction is very, very cheap.
Would you regard yourself as an optimist or a pessimist with how much history you consume and with how you look at the development of the world?
I'll be a realist. I'll tell you the main question.
Yeah,
the really kind of most fundamental question. When you talk to the people who lead the AI revolution about the potential dangers, they agree. There are threats. It's just a matter of pace. Just slow down. Everybody tells you the same thing. We would like to slow down, but we can't because we cannot trust our competitors. But then you ask them, but when you develop the AI, are you sure you will be able to trust the AI? And then they tell you yes. So it's this paradox that we cannot trust the humans, but we think we can trust the machines more than we trust the humans. They realize how kind of alarming and even ridiculous is what they are saying. That we cannot solve trust between humans, but we think we can solve trust with the aliens. But the key thing is they tell you, it's like you are trapped in a room and one door, you open it for thousands of years and there is a monster behind the door. Mm-hmm. This is the inability to trust humans. And there is another door and there is a very high chance there is an even worse monster behind that door, but we never opened it. So we are not sure. So we are gambling the future of humanity on the chance, the small chance, that behind door number 2 is not a monster.
I love to consider myself a storyteller, as an actor and a filmmaker. It's something that I think of as more than a job. I connect to it on maybe an existential level, on who I am. And one thing I often like to say even is that storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human. So as an expert on the history and the prehistory of what humans are, I'm curious to hear what you think of that statement. If I say storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
yes.
This is the source of our power. We control the world because we can cooperate in much larger numbers than any other animal. And the secret of cooperation of humans is stories. I mean, you can't get to know more than 100 or 200 individuals, but the same story can be known to millions and even billions of people. And as long as everybody believes the same story, they can cooperate. They can agree on norms and values and so forth.